Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today's guests are Tina Anderson, a former attorney turned healthcare CEO, and Krishnan, a research microbiologist. They both got together and developed what we know today as the Just Thrive supplement line. Tina Anderson and her husband Billy followed their passion for health and wellness and partnered together to launch Just Thrive, a probiotic and supplement line. Just Thrive probiotics are spore-based and some of the most effective on the market. And Tina is passionate about promoting gut health and spreading her knowledge for the far-reaching benefits of probiotics. Krishnan is a research microbiologist and has been involved in dietary supplement and nutrition market for the past 20 years. He comes from a strict research background, having spent several years with hands-on R&D in the field of molecular medicine and microbiology at the University of Iowa. And even more impressive, he's conducted over 50 human trials and published a dozen himself. Together, they are on the podcast to educate you guys on gut health and the line that Just Thrive has to support your gut health. I'm so excited to have them on the podcast. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you, Kelly. We're so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Nothing could be more important than educating the public to understand how their bodies work, especially when it comes to the gut and gut microbiome. So we're honored to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I feel like now more than ever, gut health is under a microscope because it's so integral in our immune system and supporting us to be well. So I would love just to kind of strip down to the basics. You guys have a spore-based probiotic. Can you explain what a spore-based probiotic is and how it's different?
Sure. The biggest difference with a spore-based probiotic is it has this endospore shell around itself. So it's not a mushroom cell. It has this endospore, like an armor-like coating around it. And that shell is so critical because it allows the bacteria, the probiotic, to get into the intestines alive. Many probiotics on the market have difficulty surviving the gastric system. They're sensitive organisms. They don't have a natural coating. And again, this is not a coating that we put on or scientists put on. These are the way these strains were found in nature. They had this endospore, this armor-like shell around it, and it allows it to go through that whole passage from the, all through the intestinal tract, from the, when you swallow it, all the way down through to the intestines, and they get there alive.
And so to add some additional color to what Tina said, and this is from a scientific philosophical perspective, right? Here's what's so interesting about us as humans. We are wholly inadequate to exist, right? That's, if you look at our own genome, we've got somewhere around 22,000 genes in our chromosomes. Sounds like a lot, but then when you look at an earthworm that has 38,000 genes, we are not that cool. Right? So it's like, wait a minute, how is it that we're doing all of the things that we do? Well, that's because we have over 3.5 million microbial genes in our system. So the vast majority of metabolic activity occurs because of bacterial DNA and bacterial function. With that, what we've done as a species is we've created this amazing symbiotic osmosis with the world around us, with the environment around us, right? And we have outsourced a lot of really important functions to microbes that we have naturally encountered over the course of time. And so from a philosophical standpoint, when we started looking at probiotics, because there's a lot of probiotics out there, right? And the bifidolactose strains, lots of companies are doing products with those, and that's great. Lots of companies are doing, using research strains, and they have a functionality. What we were looking at is, what are some of these strains that we have outsourced critical functions to, and can we get those strains back in our system? The spores are just those strains. When you start to learn about what they actually do in the gut, it's really mind-boggling. And you start to understand that we really cannot exist adequately without them. And unfortunately, in the modern age, we've created situations where we do exist without them, and there are consequences for that.
Oh, I'd love to dive into what are some of the things that we've outsourced to these microbes and the spore-based probiotic strains that you guys have chosen and what they do.
Yeah, so I'll give you the nerd perspective, and then Tina can actually make it sound better. So from the nerd perspective, here are a couple of things that we really don't do well. within our own genetics, right? Number one, we've all heard of leaky gut, right? And leaky gut occurs because we've got this really thin barrier that separates the outside world from the inside world. Now, when we swallow something and it goes through the tube in your intestines, we think of it as inside the body, but it's not, because the intestines are a tube that's open on both ends. So we're actually still part of the outside world when something's in your intestine. In order for it to get inside the body, it has to go through the intestinal lining into circulation. That's when it's officially inside the body. Now, what is allowed to go through that lining into circulation is a highly regulated environment. And it starts with the mucosal structure. So it's this mucus jelly-like layer. And then there's a single cell layer called the intestinal epithelium, right? Those are your intestinal lining cells. Between those two, they act as a total barrier system. And if they didn't exist as a functional barrier, all kinds of stuff would leak into your circulatory system, wreaking havoc in the body, which is what's going on in at least 60% of the population, right? So our maintenance of that intestinal barrier, that mucosal structure, and then that intestinal cells, the maintenance of that, we can almost do nothing about it with our own chromosomes. We require microbes to maintain that system because that's where they live, right? We have this unique symbiotic relationship where we go, okay, guys, we're going to give you a space to live, but it's your job to clean up and maintain that space. So maintaining the mucosal structure, the tight junctions, which is a space in between the intestinal cells, maintaining those proteins and the expression of those proteins, all of that is done by the outside bacteria, by bacterial spores. Your microbiome plays with them as well. One more thing is the regulation of the population within the microbiome, right? So if we have a dysbiotic gut, let's say we had a course of antibiotics, it's an ecological pressure that pushes the microbiome into disarray. Now, once you're in disarray, do we have a mechanism to bring it back? The answer is no. We don't have a natural mechanism within our body to go, oh, the ecosystem is off, let's bring it back to normal. We don't. We actually outsource that to microbes that we're supposed to encounter on a regular basis. They actually come in, they read the microbial environment, a fancy word called quorum sensing. And when they sense an imbalance in the ecosystem, they have mechanisms to bring down unfavorable organisms and increase the growth of favorable organisms. So they act as the orchestrators of the microbiome, the ecosystem. And so those critical functions that, when not functioning, lead to chronic illness, those are outsourced to outside bacteria.
Wow, mind-boggling. So it's
Right?
important what types, it's really important what types of bacteria we're ingesting so that they can do their job of rebalancing and getting rid of that dysbiosis.
That's exactly right. And the assumption of evolutionary biology, if evolutionary biology had a way of looking at the future, evolutionary biology would go, okay, guys, this is a good mechanism, right? You are constantly exposed to these organisms. They want a place to stay. So let's develop a symbiotic relationship where they clean up the house, you provide them a house, right? Evolutionary biology could not look hundreds and hundreds of years ahead and go, okay, we would now create concrete barriers between us and these organisms whereby we get no exposure to them virtually, right? And so we started the whole investigation on what kind of probiotics we think are critically important to maintain foundational health within the gut. And we started looking at, is there data showing if you live in a rural environment where you have more encounters with soil and earth and so on, versus an urban area, is there a difference in the microbiome and gut health? Sure enough, there is. And they've done studies in North American populations, Indian, Japanese, Russian, all different types of populations. So there's absolutely a correlation between being closer to the environment and your overall gut health. And then you start digging into what does the microbiome look like when you have more of a traditional ancestral type of life versus when you don't, like when you look at hunter-gatherer tribes in Papua New Guinea or the Hadza tribe in Tanzania. They have very different microbiomes, highly protective, very strong gut barriers, very few opportunistic pathogens, much less inflammation, all of the things that plague us in the modern society. And so that's how we kind of honed in on these organisms that live in the environment, that also live in the gut. So they have to do both, right? They can't just be soil organisms that predominantly live in the soil. Because if they don't have the mechanism to be able to colonize the gut and live in the gut, then they're not really going to do the job that we want them to do. So we were looking for both. They could live in the environment and live in the gut, because those two ecosystems are completely different, right? And when they're in the gut, they can do these things like improving your barrier system and regulating the rest of the microbes.
Wow. So are these soil-based organisms that live in the soil and live in our gut, are they also responsible for synthesizing vitamins or creating short chain fatty acids? Are these still those hero strains that we want for our own health? Or are they simply really about gut barrier? I know gut barrier is so important, obviously, because we look at inflammation, we look at autoimmunity, we look at all the side effects of a leaky, broken
Mhm.
gut, increased allergies, all of that stuff. But when we talk about gut health, we also want the availability of all those nutrients and, anti-inflammatory short chain fatty acids. Can you talk a little bit about that and if they're the same or different?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the term hero strains. I've used that before. And I would say these strains are the heroes of the heroes. The reason for that is within our microbiome, we've got what we call keystone species in the research world, right? So these keystone species are critically important. As the name exemplifies, they actually maintain the rest of the microbiome population. They produce really important things like short chain fatty acids, like you said. They produce lots of quinols, quinolines. They produce all of these compounds that not only are important to the human host, but they also feed the rest of the microbiota and maintain structure and balance within the microbiota. They increase the production of mucus in the mucin layer. They do all of this metabolic signaling, which we can talk about. They also play a huge role in stress response, and all of that starts in the gut. These spore bacteria actually help the hero strains grow. So we actually had the suspicion early on that when you add in the Bacillus endospores, you might see an increase in those keystone hero species that are anaerobic species in the gut. You can't take those as probiotics. You don't find them as probiotics, right? Like Faecalibacter prausnitzii or Akkermansia muciniphila. Those are endogenous bacteria in your colon, highly anaerobic, very sensitive to oxygen. You need to increase their growth because they are inversely correlated with disease. When you have high levels of Akkermansia or Faecalibacter, you are protected against over 150, 200 chronic illnesses, right? And this is all really well established in the literature, right? And so what we were assuming is when you add spores in, you actually get an increase in Akkermansia and Faecalibacteria. We published a study in August of not last year, in 2019, showing that occurs. And not only does that occur, it occurs at a scale that is almost mind-boggling. For example, in people with low Akkermansia to start, we saw 1,000-fold increase in the level of Akkermansia in 3 weeks, right? We're not
Wow.
talking about 50%, 100% increase, which alone would be impressive. 1,000-fold increase. We're talking about 100 to 1,000-fold increase in Faecalibacteria. So part of the way that the spores are fixing the gut lining, modulating immune response in the gut, improving metabolic response, and so on, is by increasing the growth of those keystone species.
I love that. I think that's such an important thing to understand, that there are certain probiotics that we can take and certain probiotics that really aren't going to survive
Mhm.
the in not only the hydrochloric acid and all the digestive juices, but to get down there. And you were talking about being sensitive to oxygen. So it's what I'm hearing you say is that spore-based probiotics are creating the environment to increase these keystone probiotics that are disease protective. So let's say someone came to you, as a clinician, as someone who works with clients. I'm always worried about their gut health. I want to make sure that they're having a productive bowel movement a day, that they're eating fiber and leafy greens, that they don't feel super bloated, but more importantly, that I'm seeing things like C-reactive protein not being elevated on blood tests, or interleukin-6, some of these inflammatory markers. If someone came to you, say with elevated inflammatory markers, that there's some leaky gut going on, your probiotics say to take one a day, are there functional levels where people would take more, or to really support that, kind of, I want to say, like the fixing of the dysbiosis that exists?
Yeah, we see people being able to just take one capsule a day. And we do say if you start to see that it's really working and you want to kind of fast track it a little, you could take up to two a day. And or if like you're on an antibiotic, it's better to take two at the same time. And whenever we say to take two, we say to take two at the same time. And so it's fine to take two at the same time. There are times where, maybe I've been run down a little and I've even taken, my gosh, up to 4 or 5 a day, but it's not like it's going to cause any harm if you take more, but it's also not going to necessarily do that much more. So we don't want people wasting their money. So, we have had customers who take two a day. In fact, during this whole pandemic, I've been taking two a day just because I want to make sure, double check that everything is nicely supported.
Yeah, and I think what your question speaks to, and I think this is highly important, is how do we match need to in the dosing, right? And is there a point of diminishing return? And when you look at endpoints like interleukin 6 or IL-12p, TNF alpha, interferon gamma, these are all the quintessential markers of a dysfunctional state, a pro-disease kind of state. And what we see in our clinical trials is we can bring most of those down quite significantly in a short period of time. And we typically do it with the dose that's described on the bottle. Now, from a clinical perspective, because we also work with tons of clinicians, what we see is that in some cases, it does help to bump up the dose temporarily, or when your body is under additional stress, it does help to bump up the dose temporarily. One key method of additional stress is the use of antibiotics, right? And antibiotics are important for lots of things. And so if you have to take an antibiotic, that's going to be devastating to your gut microbiome. That's an amazing area for additional need, right? So when someone's on antibiotic, I tell them to take at least two, which would be one in the morning, one in the evening, or two together. Either way, you're still getting enough in there. Or if people are going through additional stress, whether it's work life related, because stress is extremely harmful to the microbiome and harmful to that homeostatic state. And then of course, if you're going through travel, which we're not doing right now, but I traveled a lot prior to the world ending. I traveled about 400,000 miles a year. So I flew overseas and spent a lot of time. So when you go overseas, you go to different geographic regions, your microbiome fluctuates. And during those times, that can actually create some imbalance. And so I take an additional dose, which would be two. I just double the regular dose.
Great. Good to know. Yeah. I just, because I'm seeing such broken down guts and I'm
Mhm.
seeing so much inflammation on, reports on clients, it's something that, I was just curious if there's a point where it drops off. And that's
Yeah.
great to know. Can you talk
But
a little?
let me
Go
make a
ahead.
note of that though. So the way you would do it, if you were going to bump up the dose, you wouldn't bump up the dose from the beginning.
Yeah.
So in fact, what you would do is you would start with the normal dose. And then after about 2 weeks of the system starting to move in the right direction and the positive changes starting to occur, that would be the time to bump up the dose. One of the reasons for that is the spores will make a significant change within the microbiome, right? They compete with dysfunctional bacteria. It's called competitive exclusion. And one of the results of that is you can have those die-off reactions, right? So some people may experience those as loose stool or cramping and so on. So in some cases, if you start with a high dose right off the bat, that can be too uncomfortable. So what we like to do is kind of go with the regular dose for a couple of weeks, then go, okay, this person could really use a bump, and then give them a bump for 2 or 3 weeks and then come back to the regular dose.
I love it. Slow and steady, titrate up, titrate down, and keep
Yep,
going.
that's right.
Awesome. Can we talk a little bit about why you guys have decided to add antioxidants to your formulation?
Well, it wasn't even that we added antioxidants. There's one of the strains in there, Bacillus indicus, that actually creates carotenoids once it gets to the intestines. So once that strain gets to the intestines, it starts to produce alpha and beta carotene, lycopene, lutein, astaxanthin, zeaxanthin, all these incredible carotenoids, antioxidants are actually being produced in the gut where they need to be absorbed. So in fact, the researchers on the leaky gut study felt like that strain was so key because we know that leaky gut is caused by that oxidative stress. And now we have something to combat that oxidative stress. So and this strain it's incredible that it actually produces these nutrients right where they need to be absorbed.
Yeah, and this speaks to your earlier question, Kelly, about additional like compounds that are actually being produced in the gut, right? And I can give you a quick history on where this came from, which is super fun and interesting. So there are lots of animals in the animal kingdom that express a lot of carotenoids, which are some of the most powerful classes of antioxidants on their skin, right? So if you think about the orange bands around shrimp, if you think about the pink color in salmon, or the flamingo's pink color, which it gets from this brine shrimp that it eats, the big question was, where are these animals getting their antioxidants? So much so that it actually expresses on the skin. And in all of those animals, the level of color indicates health, right? So when you raise farm salmon, one of the big problems with farm salmon is it comes out gray, because they're clearly not healthy like wild caught salmon. And so the industry, what they try to do is they actually put in synthetic astaxanthin in the feed, in the fish feed, to try to get some color into the salmon. The same thing with flamingos, right? Flamingos are actually born white. And then when they move to the feeding ground, their whole drive is to feed as much as they can so they can get more pink, because during mate selection, the most pink flamingos are the ones that get selected for mating, right? So that indicates how healthy they are and what chance they have of putting out good flamenco babies. And
I
so,
love
right,
it. I'm laughing so hard over here because I never thought we would go into like flamingo
flamenco mating.
mating on this podcast.
I always try to slip in flamenco mating if I can, because it's a beautiful visual if you think about
It's
it.
perfect.
Yeah, and nobody knows how they do it either. So I'm sure your audience is going to Google this afterwards, like
Yeah.
flamenco mating. How does this happen? But what's so interesting about that whole process is that these animals, for their course of survival, require high levels of carotenoid or antioxidant expression, right? And it's also programmed into them that indicates health. The big question is, where do they get their antioxidants from? They're not eating colored fruits and vegetables and so on. As it turns out, the discovery was made that they have bacteria in their gut, probiotic bacteria, that produce such high levels of carotenoids that it's expressing on their skin. Then the next question was, well, do humans have that? Because humans are notoriously bad at absorbing carotenoids or antioxidants from colored fruits and vegetables, right? We absorb about 10% or less. And so there was a big European consortium study that was launched called the Color Spore Consortium, where about 8 different research institutes dove in to see, do we have carotenoid producing bacteria in our gut? And if we do, are they important? Sure enough, they found Bacillus indicus and a couple others. And not only do we have them, but they're extremely important because the absorption of the carotenoids from the bacteria is well over 90% versus the absorption of carotenoids that come in through food, which is less than 10%, right? So it kind of speaks to that idea that, what we really need is a nutrient factory built within our gut to produce some of these critical nutrients for us. So that strain is so critical in this formulation in terms of its efficacy. And it's the only one in the world right now. There's no other probiotic with that strain in it.
It's amazing to me because we keep learning that these microbes are so responsible for the bioavailability of so many of them, our most important nutrients. And now you're telling me our antioxidants as well. And to think like, everyone's out there eating the rainbow, hoping to absorb all the phytochemicals and antioxidants, when really it's just the fiber feeding those microbes, and those microbes are fermenting and
Totally.
creating these carotenoids internally. What other nutrients outside of antioxidants are these microbes creating that we might see a deficiency on like a blood test for?
Yeah. So one of the very critical groups of nutrients are enzymes, right? So bacillus are prolific enzyme producers. We know that as we age, we go into this pancreatic insufficiency where we really start to decrease the amount of pancreatic enzymes we produce. And of course, that dictates our ability to break down and absorb and assimilate nutrients, right? So they play such an important role in the production of enzymes in the gut. They also produce a whole host of methylated B vitamins. So in fact, the microbiome, a healthy microbiome, produces so much methylated B vitamins that only about 30% of it needs to be absorbed. The rest of it's actually used up within the microbiome. They produce hormones. Virtually every hormone in the body is produced also in the gut. That includes sex hormones like estrogen, and testosterone, and of course, all of the mood hormones, serotonin, dopamine, brain-derived neurotropic factor, GABA, all of those, right? And in fact, there's evidence that shows that our endocrine system learned how to produce these hormones from the microbiome. So they are an endocrine organ themselves. And all of this is dictated by diversity, right? One of the things that is absolutely clear from 15 years of microbiome research is that diversity in the gut microbiome is absolutely paramount to health, right? In fact, diversity will dictate how long you live within the microbiome. And one of the key things that we loved about the spores is there was this question that kept coming up is, can we actually increase diversity using probiotics, right? And that one of the answers to that was, well, what if we just increase the number of strains in the probiotic? Wouldn't that do it, right? But when you really dig into it, and you go, well, it doesn't really, because when you increase the number of strains, you're really only addressing two genuses for the most part, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Your microbiome has hundreds of genuses in there. What about the anaerobes that you never see as a probiotic? So one of the studies we want to do is, when you add the bacillus in, does it actually increase the diversity within the microbiome? And we published a study in August again of 2019 showing that when you add the bacillus endospores, you increase diversity by almost 30% in a little less than a month. So it's a significant change in the microbiome. And that kind of change speaks to health, wellness, and this development of a nutrient factory.
Wow. And you just look at our lifestyles, whether it's like antibiotics, birth control, stress, chemicals, endocrine disrupting chemicals from, whatever we're, the chemicals we're eating, the chemicals we're in contact with, are all breaking down this microbiome. And I'm so glad that you made that point, because up until this point, I was under the understanding that the diversity, if we break down and kind of like create, die off, or kill specific strains of bacteria, there's no coming back from there. There's no increasing diversity. You can increase quantity, but you can't increase diversity. And what you're telling me from your published study is you are seeing a 30% increase in diversity by just increasing that bifidobacterium. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you're increasing the intake of the bacillus endospores.
Oh, bacillus, yes.
So you're increasing diversity in the species. Now, why is that? So diversity is measured with two components to it. One is what we call richness, which is how many organisms there are. But the second part is uniformity. It's what is the uniform distribution of those organisms, right? Because you can actually have really poor diversity, even though you have lots of different species, if your microbiome is one where 80% of the volume of bacteria is within a few species, and the rest of the species are at such low levels, they're not metabolically helping you or active. So when we hurt diversity by taking things like antibiotics or drinking water that's full of chlorine and fluoride, or all of these foods with pesticides and antimicrobials, what we're doing is we're bringing down the levels of a lot of the species to a point where they're not really functional, but they're still there. Right.
Yeah.
So we've hurt our diversity quite a bit. We don't wipe them out. That's kind of a misnomer that you wipe out organisms completely. You really can't. In fact, just a little piece of trivia there. As you see on antimicrobial cleaners, it says 99.9%, right? Kills 99.9%. And the reason for that is, one thing you learn in microbiology right off the bat is you really can't know that you kill 100% of anything, right? Because our detection limits on a single cell or a single virus is really not there. So we haven't killed 100%. We're killing about 98, 99% of the microbes in our system, which means they're still there. They're waiting for the right condition to proliferate again. And one of the things the spores do is provides that condition, and that's so critical. And one of the things I've always said, which is something that just I remembered and popped into my mind, is the key to what the spores do is orchestrating an environment that helps lots of the bacteria proliferate. It provides competitive exclusion to microbes that are overgrown, and it provides supportive mechanisms to microbes that are underrepresented. And so it provides that balance, that opportunity to create balance within the microbiome. And balance within the microbiome is key, and that's what is parallel with health.
I love that. Gut health is our whole body's health. It is this
Totally.
ecosystem that's driving our wellness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what
One little image, sorry,
yeah,
to
no, I love
kind of
it. I love
to
images,
imprint on your audience,
analogies.
right?
Yeah.
So this is what I want your audience to take away, if they take away anything from this. Number one is we are a walking, talking rainforest, right? We are constructed of thousands of little micro ecosystems all over the body. We are inhabited by over 40 trillion microorganisms, more microorganisms than we have human cells in our system, about 150 times more microbial DNA than we have human DNA. And so we are a walking, talking rainforest. We've taken this beautiful microbial construct and we've put it in a very antimicrobial world. So we live essentially in an anti-human world, right? And no wonder we are seeing a continuous increase in chronic illness. And most of those chronic illnesses can be tied back to an ecological dysfunction within our microbiome, right? So that's the image that is so important for people to understand, because you can do something about it. That's the most powerful thing that we're revealing through all the science, is that most of the chronic illnesses that we thought we had no choice in, that it was a genetic lottery, genetic mishap, that, oh, my dad had Alzheimer's, so I'm probably going to have it, right? Or my mom was obese, so I'm likely going to be obese, or I'm going to struggle with weight. Nope. Most of those things are ecological disturbances that we can shift.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that image.
One of the things is that it's hard to really find any disease state that's not tied to an imbalance in our gut. And I think it's hard for people to realize that sometimes. We all know gut health is important and we associate it with, constipation or diarrhea or gas and bloating and all those things. But people aren't tying it to Alzheimer's or dementia or heart disease, cancer, diabetes. And really, it's hard to find any disease out there that's not associated with the health of our microbiome or the
Absolutely.
unhealth.
Absolutely. I mean, I see it down to like chronic acne, and I see it in joint pain and eczema. And, unfortunately, we have like two different schools of thought where then a client comes to me and they're like, well, I'm just on sporolactin just for my skin because I want it to be clear. And it's just this philosophy of like, we'll just band-aid fix this with a pharmaceutical versus like getting to the root cause of disease. And it's all starting in our gut.
Mhm.
And we need to protect ourselves from what we consider the outside world. We need to make sure that rainforest is fully thriving. And you guys have like obviously created a suite of products to do that based on research, which I'm a huge fan of. It has to be science backed. There has to be studies behind this stuff. So you've come out with actually a couple other products that support gut health that I've used with clients, the IgG product, the MK7 product. Can we talk about how and why you diversified your portfolio of products and how they support each other and work together?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest things we wanted to do as a company and as a brand is to only bring products that are missing in the market and truly needed. We know that there's no shortage of probiotics on the market, but there really weren't any spore-based probiotics, and certainly not 100% spore-based probiotics. And we knew that this was a need, a huge need in the market. And then it's the same thing with the vitamin K2. I mean, there are vitamin K2s on the product, but not with the therapeutic dose of the 320 micrograms, not with the key cofactors that are in there, and not of pharmaceutical grade. A lot of K2 on the market will degrade on the store shelf, and we've tested this as a pharmaceutical grade. And we know that this is actually making an effect with the vitamin K2, of course, is moving calcium away from the arteries and into the bone. Very critical function. So many people are deficient in vitamin K2. They have no idea how important it is. So a lot of it is raising awareness to people and letting them know these critical nutrients we need to be paying attention to. And then the IgG is the reason the IgG, Kiran and I were invited to a really incredible event, not an event, but a meeting with some of the top HIV researchers in the world. And they invited us to attend because of our research on leaky gut and gut permeability. And we met another company out there that had the IgG, and they saw some pretty incredible results, what it did to support the gut lining, the gut barrier. So IgG, of course, is the most common antibody in the body, and its job is to bind and neutralize toxins in the gut and allow it to your body to safely remove it. And so the IgG that we have actually provides about 25% more IgG in the gut to help support your immune system, to help support your gut lining, which are all, tied together.
Yeah, and to add to what Tina said, the philosophical approach here is that we're really looking for gaps in what we think are critical therapeutic areas, right? And again, not to sound cheesy, but we measure our success by human impact, and our whole idea is that as we improve or provide tools that can improve the microbiome in all aspects of it, then we are creating the highest degree of human impact, right? That's the philosophy we live by. So every product that we create is done so in that lens. Like, is it solving a problem that somebody else is not doing just in the right way? For example, we don't have a digestive enzyme product because there's lots of companies that do great digestive enzymes, right? So even if they're hot and they're exciting and you can do a lot of sales, we're not going to do it because somebody else is already doing it and they're doing it well. So we're looking for areas of need. The IgG in particular is really fascinating because what you tend to see is that the gut microbiome, and that's the mucosal layer and the intestinal epithelium, is constantly under stress, right? It's just the nature of where it is. The most exposure you get to the outside world is through the digestive tract. It's the largest area of sampling. It's some of the most active immune areas in the body. And so there's constant things that are happening in the GI tract that induce a stress response. Now, what is so important for the GI tract is the ability of it to continuously repair from inherent damage, right? Just the process of digestion, the exposure to the outside world from foods and chemicals and all that is going to create damage. Now, what facilitates repair is having a healthy, diverse microbiome, having things like short chain fatty acids being produced, antioxidants, but then bringing down the toxic load in the GI tract is a huge support for its ability to repair. And that's one of the key things that the IgG does. It's like this highly specific detoxifier because the immunoglobulins in that product bind to things like mold toxins, environmental toxins, pathogens, and so on, thereby reducing the toxigenic load in the gut. And that further allows repair to occur. And you see that, and I've demonstrated that in a number of clinical trials as well. So it's a really awesome helping hand to your immune system and to your natural detoxifying systems within the body. So, and again, because we have such high toxic load these days, we really need that additional helping hand.
I love the way that you just explained that, because when I think about it, what I do when I work with clients is lowering their contact with endocrine disrupting chemicals, with pharmaceuticals, with antimicrobials, with pesticides. But there's always going to be a level of real life and uncontrollability that you have when you're eating out or you're at a friend's house, or just maybe the price tag on certain things, and you're making that trade-off, knowing that, like, I'm going to come in contact with some stuff and it's okay, my body is really resilient, it's able to fight off everything. What can I do to support that natural process? And you're talking about the IgG, which are your I can never say it,
Immunoglobulins. Yeah.
Immunoglobulins.
Yeah.
Immunoglobulins. And we can you explain, does our body naturally produce immunoglobulins? What, are they inside our body versus inside our gut tract? Is there a specific time we should be taking IgG?
Yeah, so we do. We produce lots of different classes of immunoglobulins. So IgG, which is what this is, when we produce it, it's typically in circulation. So
Right.
it doesn't come out into the gut, which is an interesting thing, because what comes out in the gut is the IgA immunoglobulin. So IgA is kind of this less specific, let's go out and kind of just flood the gut lining with this immunoglobulin, and it may or may not bind to certain things, right? It's non-specific in that sense. When we get an immune response to something, we end up producing IgG, but for us, it stays in circulation. So the benefit of this kind of supplementation is that the immunoglobulins we're getting come from a bovine source, so from cows. So if you imagine cows are out there in pasture, they're grazing, they're encountering all kinds of things, environmental toxins, mold, viruses, bacteria, all kinds of stuff as they're out there in pasture. And their immune systems are producing immunoglobulins that are specifically against those compounds and will neutralize those compounds. So we're able to take the blood out of the cow, spin it down, and concentrate the serum, which is where the immunoglobulins are, and then further pull out the immunoglobulins out of that. Now, when we get to take that orally, that means we're getting IgG immunoglobulins in our gut, which we normally wouldn't have. And what is great about IgG versus the IgA we typically have is IgG is highly specific, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the extra benefit comes from. And so what the time of day you take it, I like to take it as something I take at night before bed. And I also will often take it before I break my fast. I love doing intermittent fasting, and it's something that I like to send into the system prior to actually starting to expose it to foods and things like that.
I love it, because what you're basically saying is when you take the blood out of the cows, if we were to do an allergy test on those cows, it would be the concentrations of those IgGs that we're looking for specific things that their body would be fighting, right? And so you're basically creating this defense mechanism. It's almost like you think about when everyone was taking charcoal pills, which I'm
Mhm.
sorry, charcoal is not smart. It's taking everything out of the gut with you and including your nutrients and all of that stuff. But this IgG product is specific to pulling out and being a defense mechanism against very specific things in the gut.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the beauty of IgG, because those antibodies are highly specific. And then when you look at evolutionary use of this, you think about the Magi tribe in Africa. One of the things that the warriors do to gain strength is they drink cow's blood, right? And there's lots of cultures that do that, where they actually drink the blood of these animals. And part of the key aspects of health from that are these kind of immunoglobulins and immune factors that are found in the blood. And I'm guessing most people aren't going to go out and drink cow's blood. And so we would take the immunoglobulins as supplements, and it has huge benefits in the gut. So, your clinical approach of saying, okay, let's start reducing the toxic load, because the more you're exposed to that is toxigenic, the harder it is to repair the system, right? And a lot of our lifestyle now has this imbalance between things that break down the system and then our opportunity to heal the system, right? We just have gone way in the other end where we're constantly causing toxicity and breakdown. And so we're not having enough healing opportunity. And so you're trying to bring back that balance. This IgG just really gives a huge helping hand to that.
I love it. I love how synergistic the products are. And what really just came up to me is giving your body the opportunity to heal, because we are
Mhm.
we're amazing. I always think about the body's exhibit, where you just see the healing that can happen and how amazing the human body is. And I want to remind people of that. I know we have a lot of conversations around like leaky gut and breakdown and hormone imbalance, but the most beautiful thing is that we are just totally capable of healing ourselves if we protect that environment and allow it to thrive. Which brings me to the point of like getting consistent. I mean, so many times I sit down with clients and they like have a box of supplements that they were given, that their functional MD gave them, or that they picked up one thing here and one thing there. Can you talk about being consistent with probiotics and your like gut support supplements, and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, health is more like a marathon than anything else, right? It's about consistent small steps. And and achieving health seems like a daunting task to a lot of people. We're all fooled by looking at things like Instagram all the time and all these seemingly healthy, sexy people, which I'm not one of those, and so I'm always,
Yes,
have
you
a little
are.
disdain. Thank you, but I'm not showing off a six pack on Instagram, right? And we conflate those images with health. Keep in mind that fitness is not necessarily health, right? Number of push-ups you can do or planks you can do and sit-ups is not run in parallel with health. In fact, a lot of those types of conditions are actually quite unhealthy because the stress of a lot of that kind of exercise, it actually creates more leaky gut and more illness. So resilience is key to health. And the way you build resilience is by making small, consistent changes that you stick with over time. Because what you're really doing is shifting an ecosystem and shifting a metabolic pathways, your metabolic response to the world around you, right? And so that comes from consistency, because if not, you can always take one step forward and two steps back. If you do a little bit, like a 1 week, you're like, I'm going to revamp my life. I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to exercise 3 times a day, and I'm going to take every supplement in the cabinet. And then like in 2 weeks, you're exhausted from that. And you're like, crap, I'm not doing that anymore, right?
Yeah.
So it's really about adding small steps that you remain consistent on. And one of the things I tell people is, don't think about like changing your overall health with the ultimate outcome, right? Think about changing your overall health by changing one small behavior each day that you can then stick with, and then it'll accumulate into overall health and wellness down the road. And that's the best we can do.
You're preaching to the choir right now. I always talk about building a foundation of a house brick by brick. It's like
Yeah.
one habit, get it cemented into your life, make it a thing, and then add something else. That's why I hate New Year's resolutions in January, because people come to me with these laundry lists of 30 things they're going to do every day. And I'm like, I can't even do that. Like,
Oh
let's
my God.
let's start with 1 or 2 things.
Yeah.
So speaking of
Oh,
that,
and if you don't mind, let me add a little more nuance to that. Sorry to cut
no,
you
I
off.
love it. I'm having so much fun, actually. This is a great podcast.
Well, good. Thank you so much. So BJ Fogg, I love the work that he does. He's a Stanford researcher in psychology and human behavior. One of the things that I love that he does, he has this whole program called Tiny Habits, right? And it's about creating these tiny habits. But here's a critical thing about it for neurological development and really enhancing those tiny habits is celebrating those small victories, right? So let's say you remember to go to your cabinet at some point during the morning and take your most important supplements, your probiotic, your IgG, your K2. Once you do that, throw up your hands and celebrate it a little bit. It sounds goofy, right? It sounds dumb, but do that. Like, do a little dance, throw up your hands, shake your booty a little bit, and have a little fun with that, because that's a celebration that ingrains your neuronal pathways that that's something you should do. Think about it, the other tiny habits that we do every day without even thinking, like brushing your teeth, right? Most people have been programmed from early on. A lot of that is through fear, because your parents are going to get you in trouble if you don't brush your teeth. But either way, the neural pathways are there where you're going to wake up and brush your teeth, right? That's just the way you do that habit. And so if you celebrate your minor successes, that is remembering to do the thing that's good for you, it will actually ingrain itself over a period of time. So I want everyone, when you take your Just Thrive probiotic, your IgG, throw up your hands, celebrate, throw on music for 30 seconds, dance a little bit. If you do that every day for a couple of weeks, you'll be doing it automatically. And not only will you do it automatically, the endorphin release that you get from celebrating that will automatically occur. So you'll feel like a winner because you are a winner.
I love it. I have my son Sebastian. He takes a couple of supplements. We have him on vitamin D and a multivitamin. And we're gonna start doing some happy dance, some high fives after, because
Yes,
we all take our supplements at the same time. He's
that's awesome.
actually the one who reminds us the most.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, I love that.
whenever we make a smoothie, we open the cabinet and all of our supplements are right above all of our smoothie stuff. So it's he's like a nice little alarm clock for supplements, because he sees his and he's like, Chewy. And I'm like, yeah, you can have one. So now we're gonna high five and dance thanks to you. I love it.
What great habits you're giving to him. That's awesome. And don't forget, you could open the capsules with the probiotic and mix it with food. You could actually even bake with them. You could bake with them up to 455 degrees. You could add them in different foods. I used to put in my son's piping hot oatmeal. So just keep that in mind too with the probiotic.
Well, I love that actually. I was going to mention that when Sebastian was little, he had really horrible eczema. We had a really like pretty intense birth. He was given antibiotics and put on TPN nutrition at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And my functional MD actually was the one who recommended, because there are so many baby probiotics that are marketed out there, and it's like one strain of probiotics, something specific for eczema or for, colic or whatever it may be, like the one identified strain. And my functional MD actually said, and that's why I found you guys, is because he had put Bash on a spore-based probiotic, and I was to open a half a cap and put it into his like one pumped bottle of breast milk a day when he was younger, and we had a significant increase, improvement in his skin. And so from there, we went from half a cap up to a full cap. And that's how I found Just Thrive.
Awesome. I love it.
That's how I found you guys, was actually an inability to get the spore-based probiotic that he had recommended. And when I looked at the back of the bottle, they were almost like the exact same profile. A few were different, and then we started using Just Thrive. So that's actually the probiotic that Bash has been on since he was 2 weeks old.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, which is why you're here today, which is
love it.
But
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, but it is really interesting because I think we get really caught up in the marketing, but we want to just make sure that it's working, right? We want to know that it's working, and that I love to know that I can bake with it. I love to know that I can mix it in with food, because he hasn't been doing bottles. And when you think about kids, drinking something, the one thing that I have always been told, and correct me if I'm wrong, is anytime I make him a food and we add the probiotics to it, it's like, if he doesn't eat it, we're not saving that. That's done.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome. Okay. I love it.
Yes.
So before we end today, I would love to just jump into maybe some other lifestyle-based habits that we can stick to support gut. We talked about how stress can be so detrimental, and travel can have an impact on our microbiome, and some of the other things like endocrine disrupting chemicals. But is there anything positive we can do to really support gut health along with taking probiotics and IgG?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, one of the things I've done is just doing deep breathing and meditation. I think people think that's so woo-woo, and how could that really affect your gut health? But it really is completely tied. I mean, the vagus nerve is the communication superhighway between the gut and the brain. And it's really important to be doing mindful practices, whatever speaks to you. Deep breathing works for me, sometimes a little bit more than meditation, but those I think are really, really beneficial to our gut health.
Yeah, and from my perspective, there's a number of things we could do, right? So I'll just quickly list them. First and foremost is increasing the diversity in your diet. And unfortunately, in the health world, people get pigeonholed into one type of diet or the other, right? They're like, I'm paleo, I'm carnivore, I'm vegan, and that's, humans didn't have the luxury of trying to make those kind of decisions as we kind of evolved through this really harsh world, right? So we became omnivores, and we are actually designed to eat a very broad spectrum within our diet, and in fact, more so than almost any other species on Earth. And we have this large fermentive base of organisms within our colon that requires a huge diversity in our diet. And the higher the diversity in your diet, the more diversity in your microbiome, and the longer you'll live. It's just that simple, right? And so let's not get pigeonholed into one of these kind of activism type diet profiles. So then the second thing you can do is, it's also really good to not feed your microbiome sometimes. So intermittent fasting can be incredibly powerful if done correctly, and if it suits your system, but it should. Most people's system, it's highly beneficial. Getting outside into kind of unmanicured environments. So you'll be surprised at how influential just going on a hike can be whether it's through your local forest preserve or walking on the beach, depending on where you live. Just some interaction with nature actually has a huge impact on the diversity of your microbiome. Getting a pet can be really useful. So there are studies that show that households that have dogs have kids with lower incidence rates of allergies, asthma, and viral infections. So pets bring in good outside environmental bacteria, so some increased exposure. Another one is refrain from sterilizing your home, right? We've all been programmed into thinking that that kind of bleached, fake lemon smell is the clean smell, right? It's actually not at all. Most surfaces in your home do not have to be sterilized with an antimicrobial cleaner. If you bring home a raw chicken and you get raw chicken juice on your counter, yes, the Clorox it and wipe it clean. But most surfaces in my home, for example, we clean with a squirt bottle of water. We put a couple drops of essential oil in it just for smell, but most surfaces is clean with water. You really don't need to, or should you want to, sterilize most of your home. That actually has a huge impact on your microbiome. And then, like Tina said, stress management. Your microbiome, of course, when dysfunctional, will drive an unhealthy stress response, but your unhealthy stress response can also create dysfunctions within your microbiome. So whether it's 5 minutes of some sort of meditation app that you do every morning, I know most people, it's mind-boggling to think I'm going to go into all this meditation and do yoga and all of that stuff, right? And for me, it was equally mind-boggling. So what I focus on is getting an app, and the last thing I do before bed is listen to a 5-minute meditation. That alone can shift the brain waves in your head from more into alpha wave dominance, and that reduces glucocorticoid production, which actually reduces inflammation in your immune cells. When inflammation comes down in immune cells, you have less opportunistic bacteria and viruses that grow. You have lots of opportunistic pathogens in your body that look for stress response as their way of triggering virulence factors, because they know the host is compromised, the host immune system is compromised when stress hormones are high. So that's when they turn on their virulence genes, right? And we're talking about cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, streptococcus, staphylococcus, all of these opportunistic organisms in your system. So just those few things. Again, those are all tiny little things that you could start to do that'll make a huge impact. And when we're done with the pandemic, hug people, because hugging and close human contact actually increases your microbial sharing, and that actually has a huge impact on your overall health as well.
I love it. Ending the tips with hug your friends and your family. I guess hug your quarantine right now, and when this is over, hug everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, in lieu of hugging, one of the things you can do, and you can add this to your hugging when we're done with this whole pandemic thing, is compliment people, right? So here, and this is so interesting, the biochemistry of this. There's most of you have heard of oxytocin. Obviously, it's the kind of bonding hormone. One of the most important hormones that creates that bond between mother and child right off the bat, right?
I'm breastfeeding. I'm doused in it right now.
Absolutely, you're swimming, and that's why you've got this amazing glow about you and all that, right?
Oh my God, I was like looking at you, like you're beautiful. I mean, you're absolutely beautiful.
Oh, geez, thanks.
See, and that helps your oxytocin, Tina. So
okay. Oh yeah.
So what studies show is complementing each other and being kind to other humans actually increases your oxytocin. When oxytocin goes up, cortisol comes down quite dramatically. They work antagonistically, right? So if you can't go and hug people and be near people right now, you can get on Zoom and go, wow, you look amazing, but be genuine about it, of course. You give fake comments. But if you see something that you like and you want to share about people, share it. That actually has an impact on yourself.
I love it. Well, this has been one of my most fun podcasts to date. I just feel like, thank you for bringing the nerd factor, as you called it. It's what I love and live for, is breaking down really intense science for people, giving them actionable steps. And gosh, this podcast is loaded with it, from like what we should be taking and why, and how it's different, and how to really support that epithelium and mucosal layer to hugging our quarantine and complimenting our friends. So much good stuff here. I can't thank you guys enough. I literally I have the chills. This was a really good one. So thanks so much for being here, and I'm so excited to get it up.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
Kelly. Really appreciate your platform and everything you do for the world and for humanity.
Well, spore-based probiotics have helped, not only Sebastian, but a number of my clients. So I really, thank you for putting out such a quality product and helping me help others.
Yeah, and we'd be more than happy to come on again and give you updates on new research that we're doing. You mentioned acne. We finished and publishing one acne trial. We've got a second big one going on because the gut-skin axis is a very important real thing. But at the end of the day, I think the thing that's really going to change the state of healthcare in this country is people being empowered with information, right, about how to affect their own outcomes and those around them, their loved ones. And so programs like this are critical to that. And so we're absolutely honored and excited about being able to come on here and share this stuff with your audience. So thank you so much for that opportunity. We'll keep doing our work. You keep doing yours, and then we'll mash somewhere in the middle again at some point to get this out to people.
Cool. I love it. Well, I'll have you back to nerd out again. And until next time, have a awesome rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Sounds good.